The practice of meditation is not a standalone activity. We cannot isolate the person who practices meditation and not look at other factors in that person's life. And, successful and wholesome meditation requires the right environment, it requires the right type of people around us, the right lifestyle, and the right nutrition. So I want to talk about nutrition today. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people today are struggling. Genuine, authentic practitioners of the Dhamma, the training on this path, are struggling with things like restlessness, anger, procrastination, depression, anxiety, insomnia, all kinds of things that are being labeled as mental illnesses, but a lot of the times at the root of them is a nutritional deficiency of some kind. And this is really important because we have to remember that our bodies are a vehicle. The Buddha talked about crossing the flood of ignorance, crossing this immensely vast ocean of ignorance through the vehicle of the body. And this, of course, is not separate from the quality of our thoughts, our mood, our disposition towards life, our motivation to sit, to practice, to listen to the suttas, to engage in wholesome discussions around the Dhamma, to listen to the Dhamma, and to apply the principles that the Buddha taught in our everyday lives. But in order to do this effectively, we need to have a healthy brain. And to have a healthy brain, we need to give it its fuel. Everything requires fuel. And every animal, every species has its appropriate fuel. So we can't put milk in a car and expect it to move. So we cannot give a human being inappropriate nutrition and expect it, the human being, to attain arahantship, like we see in the suttas, for example, when we read about the times when the Buddha lived and taught, people would become awakened left and right, and a sentence here, a paragraph there, a few weeks here, and one day here, and people would attain clarity so quickly. And today we might be wondering why is it taking us so long? Well, there are many reasons, but I think a big one is the fact that we live in a world of high caloric malnutrition. A lot of people today, even though are ingesting food, unfortunately, but they're not ingesting the appropriate food for their physiology, for the human biology, which leaves the brain starved in a state of deprivation. And because we forget that food is not just food, food is information. And the food that we eat must be compatible with the needs of our bodies. It's like a key matching a keyhole. So there is a biological context to our mental state. We cannot isolate our moods, our mental states from the food that we eat, because it's really amazing how the teaching of dependent origination is so beautifully applicable to the human body when we look at the fact that most of our body is made of microbes, fungi, parasites, basically bacteria. And they are the ones that eat the food that we eat, not us. And we just pretty much, we experience the byproduct of the food that they eat, and which then we experience in terms of neurotransmitters, hormones, the biochemistry of the brain. So and this ecosystem, that mostly people tend to talk about, the gut, is actually the whole body. Our whole body is, made of microbes and is inhabited by bacteria, and so they need their proper food for us to be able to produce our feel-good chemicals, our neurotransmitters, to facilitate harmonious communication between cells, and a content, joyful, happy human being who would wake up joyful, go to bed joyful, and be driven to do the right thing, to meditate, to be in the right environment, to really cultivate the mind. So, unfortunately, a lot of people today fall prey to ideology, politics, and they may have very good intentions. For example, a lot of people who practice vegetarianism or veganism, they come from a good place. They want to protect animal life, or the environment or nature, believing that their choice of not eating meat, for example, would prevent the killing of animals. However, I would like to really invite those people to look more, look at the bigger picture, to really expand their gaze and take in the fact that there's not a single organism in nature that survives on its own. Every single animal depends on another animal or plant for its survival. So there is a natural order to things that unfortunately we have been conditioned to dismiss as arbitrary or optional or up to us to decide. But that is not true, because we don't decide to inhale and exhale. We don't decide to circulate the blood, to digest the food that we ingest. We don't interfere with those processes at their core functionality, because they are the way they are. It's completely impersonal. And the same applies to the fact that every species has its appropriate diet. And what do we mean by appropriate? In the sense that its bodily physiology is most equipped to absorb, make use, and benefit from that nutrition safely without being harmed. And this is relevant to the practice very much, because as Buddhist practitioners, we commit to a moral training, and that moral training begins with the commitment to not cause harm, either to ourselves or others. However, a lot of people today, again, without realizing probably, are really, in a way, breaking the first precept, I would even say, by depriving their bodies from proper nutrition and being falsely convinced that they're doing something good. They're helping some animal or some plant, or some unwholesome practice is being ameliorated by their choice. But however, they neglect to see the fact that they're harming themselves. They are disrespecting their own nature, the needs of the body, the needs of the mind, because the mind is not separate from the body. We cannot isolate them. They're very much dependent. And so one thing we need to realize is that there are two categories of food. This is, again, ideology aside, politics aside, even nutrition science aside, just bare biology, bare physiology tells us that there are two categories of foods. Foods that feed and foods that cleanse. So you can think in terms of arising and ceasing, actually, in the Dhamma, Samudaya and Nirodha, the arising and the ceasing. So feeding foods build the human body on a cellular level, because just like everything in nature, our cells are not permanent. They are born and they die, and normally it's a very short lifespan that they have. So this constant, non-stop process of cellular regeneration requires fuel, just like everything else. So foods that feed really make this process possible. It's like construction material. Think of a building where you would, of course, need to use construction material. And so that's the function of foods that build. So they facilitate, they make the cellular regeneration possible, and this is how a child grows tall, grows teeth, grows, good nails, good hair, the physical structure, the joints, the bones, organs, etc., etc. And then there are foods that are there to cleanse the body, and the feeding foods. We know scientifically that when analyzed in a laboratory, it was discovered that the animal protein and the animal fat is almost identical to the human body's protein and fat. Because if we remove the liquid part of the human body, what we have is basically 50-50 protein and fat. So this compatibility is really important. Whereas plant foods are not compatible because their protein is indigestible for the human digestive system. So this is, and here actually I want to point out to a very beautiful principle that we can use to distinguish between two categories of animals in nature. And this has to do with the position of the eyes. It turns out that the animals which have their eyes on the sides of the head, these are prey. And the animals which have eyes on the front of the face, these are hunters. So this is very interesting how the position of the eyes distinguishes between prey and predators. For the first category, think about the cow, the horse, the deer, basically grazing animals. They have their heads down, they're grazing, they're eating grass, whereas their eyes on the sides of the head are their guards. Basically, they're watching for predators, and once they see one, they run. So the eyes are there to protect them. For the hunters, in contrast, the eyes are in front and they're there for hunting. So the eyes, think the lion, the tiger, the dog, the cat, the human being also. So we fall into the category of hunters, and ancestrally human beings have hunted, have thrived on animal food, and we know that, again, pure biology here, physiologically, biologically, the human digestive system is absolutely compatible to absorb safely, to use the nutrition from animal foods versus plant foods. So as you know, the cow has a couple of, if not, I think 4 stomachs. Most of the body of a cow is actually stomach. And the function of that is to break down plant protein. So there are many, many microbes in the stomachs of the cow, many bacteria, billions and billions, which have the function of fermenting, basically, the plant that the cow grazes. So, the cow grazes, eats the grass for hours. These microbes in the stomach, they get to work, they pre-digest, break down the plant protein and convert it into fat and protein. I mean, they convert it into absorbable fat and protein through fermentation. Now, when we look at the human body, our stomach, we have a very small single stomach, which has very few microbes because the acid environment doesn't allow many microbes to survive. And these few microbes that are there are most capable of absorbing animal fat and animal protein. And when it comes to plant matter, they do not have there's no fermentation process, basically, nowhere near the equivalent of what we see in the cow, for example. So, this doesn't mean that we're not supposed to eat plants. Of course not. But all we need to do is go back in history and inform and educate ourselves of the ancestral context in which humans consumed plants. And when we do that, we discover that then the question is processing it properly. And so basically what we have done as humans, we have done outside our bodies what the animals do inside their bodies. Like the cow, the deer, the horse, they ferment the plants inside the bodies, and we can do the same outside. So we ferment vegetables, plants, and in that way the microbes break down the proteins in the plants, and so then they become safe for us to ingest. Because a lot of people don't know that, and this is, of course, many of us have been victim to this conditioning because we grew up, being told that plants are superfoods, eat your vegetables, avoid meat, cholesterol this, cholesterol that. So unfortunately, we live in a topsy-turvy world, and most of mainstream information you need to turn upside down to see the truth. And here too, it turns out that we have to process plants properly in order to make them safe for us, because they have what they are called anti-nutrients. So these are toxins, natural defense mechanisms of the plants, which are supposed to protect the plant from being consumed. There are many, but one category of such toxins are called oxalates. And unfortunately, many people today have, young people have joint pain, arthritis. Children have kidney stones today because of oxalate in their kidneys. These are like sharp razors, almost little crystals that accumulate, they bioaccumulate in the body and create these sharp structures that are very, very painful and dangerous. They can create joint pain, arthritis, all kinds of neurological issues, mental issues, all because of this lost knowledge that we humans used to have on how to process plants properly before consuming them. So this is very important because, again, to go back to why this is relevant to the Dhamma, to the practice, to successful practice, is again the fact that we have to respect nature, and we have to remember that going against nature tends to create suffering, or at least add more to what we already have. And many people don't know that if someone is so let me go back to the two categories of food actually. So I mentioned about the foods that are meant to feed us and foods that are meant to cleanse us. Unfortunately, what has been happening in the world today is cleansing foods such as plants and herbs, vegetables have been presented to be feeding foods. And so we have this thing called the vegan diet, which is actually not a diet at all. It's a fast. So it's a wonderful thing, short term, really cleanses the body, given the tons of toxins we are exposed to today, it's a wonderful thing. However, it's only meant to be short term. Imagine people cleansing and cleansing and cleansing, and then there comes a moment when the body sends signals, okay, now it's time to feed me, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And now we suppress that signal and force the body to stay in that cleansing state. And this is really sad because one thing many people don't know is that we need cholesterol for our hormones. Most of our hormones are made of cholesterol. So cholesterol is not optional, it's not the villain it's been turned into, it's actually the hero, because it's so essential for our brains especially, which is mostly made of fat. And did you know that there is no cholesterol in plants? So people who practice the vegan fast as a lifestyle, number one, women will lose their periods, they will lose their reproductive capacity because there is no cholesterol to produce their sex hormones. So this is really sad how many young women, teenagers, are falling prey to these ideologies, thinking that they're doing the right thing and they're destroying their health. There is, imagine no cholesterol, no raw material for hormones, the havoc that it will create in the biochemistry of the body. And imagine then having that person to sit to meditate. No wonder there's so much restlessness, there's so much agitation, insomnia, anger, constant procrastination. People mean to do the right thing and yet they find themselves postponing and just not being able to have the motivation because again, their gut microbes are starving, they're not getting the right nutrition, so they're not producing the feel-good chemicals, the dopamine, the serotonin, which is mostly produced in the gut and then transferred to the brain through the vagus nerve. So, and then our vehicle is in shambles, and then we wonder why is it that we are not attaining arahantship or even the lowest stages of awakening, which we see again in the suttas, people attaining left and right and so quickly in such a short time span that it's really incomparable to the world today. But we have to remember that unfortunately we live in a very toxic world. And at the time of Lord Buddha, there were no cesarean births, which deprived the child from the up to 200 birth microbes, which they would get only when the child passes through the birth canal, natural birth. There were no antibiotics, no indoor living, broken families, toxic food, toxic air, toxic water, dyes and chemicals in food, and the list goes on and on. So today it seems to me that the worst disease is ignorance, having the wrong information and then the wrong perception and of course the wrong behavior. So my encouragement is for, please do not take my word, just go study history. Really, let's put politics, ideology, even nutrition science. We have been diverted from looking at the bigger picture, history. How did our ancestors live and thrive for millennia? And all of a sudden, in these last 50, 100 years, we have countless numbers of chronic illnesses, mental illnesses. This is completely unnatural, completely unnatural. And again, I would like to bring this back to Sila, the practice of virtue, because we owe it to ourselves to look after our bodies to the best of our abilities, to look after our brains, our minds, and not create unnecessary suffering, because it's not personal. There's no intention in nature to have dominance or suppression, or why are things the way they are. None of that. It's completely impersonal. And again, as I was saying, there is an order of things that if we disagree with, for example, if someone says, I don't want animals to be killed, well, and there are certainly very cruel practices today in animal farming and things like that, but we should not let the misguided choices of those people who mistreat animals to uproot us from our own nature, and basically throwing the baby with the bathwater. It's also interesting to consider that in nature, when we look, there is no tiger who has a special diet among tigers, or there's no lion who happens to be confused as to what is its proper food. It's very simple. We really need to go back to simplicity and just respect nature the way it is, and if we don't like it, become an arahant, because that's the only way you can exit the cycle of existence. Because once we're born, we are born to a species. Today we happen to be born as humans, and we have to respect the biological context of that species for our own benefit, because ultimately life is so short and it's so rare, and it's such a waste to deprive ourselves of the preconditions for good mental health, and therefore a good meditation practice. Because again, food is not just energy; it's the biochemistry of our brain, the electrical, chemical, biological infrastructure. So we're not here to say, okay, let's eat the right nutrition, be healthy, experience pleasure. No, food, at least as far as the Dhamma practitioner is concerned, the serious practitioner, it's a means to an end. It's a way to enhance our vehicle, so that we can cross the flood as soon as possible and save ourselves from suffering, to free ourselves from dukkha. So it is not something to think of as an end in itself. No. And just to, maybe I could leave you with some references, like books you can consult. For example, there is Natasha Campbell Mcbride, a Russian doctor, very, very prolific doctor, writer of literature on health and medical issues. So I highly recommend her books. She has a book also called Vegetarianism Explained. She talks about the many lies that people have been fed to fall the narrative, to buy the narrative of vegetarianism as a animal, as a planet-friendly diet versus, animal-based foods. Complete nonsense. So please consult that. And there's also The Vegetarian Myth, a book written by Lierre, a recovering vegan who almost killed herself through her diet, and so-called diet, but actually a fast. And she really gives us the full story as to what's really going on with this whole vegan propaganda, because unfortunately we also know for a fact that the human brain shrinks when veganism is practiced long term. So basically the starvation gets to a point where literally the brain starts to shrink. There's actually a book called Why Vegans Have Smaller Brains. This is a fact that needs to be respected. So I think this is again, I think the guiding principle here is, or could be, the dependent origination, dependent arising, the conditionality, the dependencies, and the fact that there's no person involved. There's no. It's not. I struggle to find a different word to capture this, but we should not take this personally. And it's sad that many people fail to see their deteriorating health, and while being identifying themselves as a savior of the planet, or a better person, a more spiritual person. Unfortunately, it couldn't be further from the truth, because, as I said earlier, they're causing harm. And there's nothing spiritual in that. And they are shooting themselves in the foot while trying to run a marathon. So let's not do that. Let's respect nature. Let's really care for our health, and give our brain the fat that it needs, because Dhamma cannot grow on poor soil. And we see this a lot, unfortunately, in the world today, where many people falling into the trap of basically depriving their bodies of its natural nutrition end up having all kinds of maladies, physical, mental, emotional problems, and while trying to build a meditation practice to apply the teachings of the Dhamma in their lives. And needless to say, when the vehicle is not in good condition, how can we expect the mind to really experience the states of clarity when it's basically in starvation mode? And something very, I wouldn't say interesting, but very telling happens when the body is kept in this state of cleansing long term. And this is when the body is pushed into the state of cannibalism, actually, because it literally begins to eat its own protein. This is a fact. When the body is forced into the state of, or the mode of cleansing, long term, it just begins to use whatever building material is available, and that, you know, could be its own muscles. And we see this in people who are very skinny. They, you know, vegans or vegetarians who may be eating plant protein without realizing that their body does not have the mechanism to break down, absorb safely, and, you know, access the nutrition in the plants. People don't realize that, you know, outside the enormous, vast ecosystem of bacteria and fungi, which is a huge part of most of human body, as I was saying, is made of microbes, bacteria. And whatever of, you know, the human cells that we can call as part of the body, they can only use protein and fat. Again, this is a scientific fact. This is not an opinion, not a thought. This is a biological fact. And so when the body does not get its natural nutrition, the protein and fat, it begins to eat its own protein. In a way, turning carnivore. It's eating its own protein, literally, its own muscles. So, and people often say, well, plants have so many vitamins and minerals. Yes, but just because they're there doesn't mean our body has the mechanism to access that nutrition, and let alone to access in a way without being harmed by all the toxins, all the, you know, toxins that are naturally in the plant as part of its defense mechanism, and we ignorantly ingest all of that, thinking, yes, you know, I'm getting all the potassium, all the, you know, the cliche of spinach. It's terribly naive and sad to take something as toxic and believing that you're putting in good, healthy food into your body. But nothing could be further from the truth, because we have to be very careful. We have to process the plant properly to deactivate, to neutralize the toxins, and then to be able to absorb some of the minerals, the vitamins, without harming. And that could only be a supplement, because the bulk of our nutrition should come from animal fat and animal protein. Again, as I was saying, this is the optimal absorbability, because it's not only what we eat, it's what we absorb. This is very important. Just because we put food into our bodies doesn't mean that our bodies are able to absorb the entirety of the nutrition in that food. For example, corn traditionally, ancestrally, has been going through 5 steps of detoxification, and it involves grinding or I forget the specific names, but they're very specific, ancestrally practiced. I think only in Mexico these days they're still practicing this. But it was never ingested just like that, the way it's happening in the world today. So, because it's going to cause vitamin deficiencies, it will create niacin deficiency. It's very, again, it comes down to having the right information. People don't realize that most of what we think we know, most of what we believe about nutrition has come from food companies, not from unbiased, respectable scientific studies or research. Not at all. That's why we need to go back in history. We need to study what our ancestors ate, what kept them so healthy compared to what we have today. And I think there are 3 principles which are very good to apply to our approach to nutrition. So, eating locally, whatever is available in your immediate environment, eating seasonally, because this allows the body to detox from all the plant toxins. When we take a break from one season to another and not eat the plants year round, it was never the case in history for people to eat tomatoes, for example, all year round. So locally, seasonally, and ancestrally, we should ask ourselves, is this an ancestral food? Did our ancestors eat this food? Is this even food? So, and then of course the principle of processing, preparing foods appropriately. For example, if you want to eat bread, it needs to be sourdough bread, because that's the appropriate duration of fermentation for the gluten to break down, for the anti-nutrients in the wheat to be deactivated, so that it doesn't bind to our minerals and block the body's ability to absorb them. Because this is something that's happening a lot without people realizing. For example, oxalates, the plant toxins, the most common ones, they bind to our electrolytes and minerals, and they block the body's ability to absorb them. They basically pull them out of the body. So this is, again, comes down to knowing the right information and educating ourselves, which involves a lot of unlearning the things that we believe to be truth, and really accepting with humility that yes, we were fooled, and who hasn't? Who hasn't? We all have been fooled in one aspect of our lives or another, in some way or another. I mean, let's just think back into COVID. I think we all did something stupid without realizing that we were, not thinking. And all of this, again, I want to bring it back to the thinking, because why is this important? Because free thought is, I would say, the most important asset that we can have today. Our ability to think clearly, to think freely, is very much dependent on the nutrition, on the food that we give our body and our brains. So this is very important for our practice, and something that we do have so much control over, if only we have the right information, and so that we can protect ourselves from harm and others, because unknowingly a lot of people are not just practicing these practices long term, which is very harmful. By the way, the Buddha was neither a vegan nor a vegetarian, so people don't realize that he ate everything that was offered. So do we know something Lord Buddha did not know? I don't think so. Again, the historical glance is so important, because we have been, this confusion that people are in is totally engineered, first of all. This is not natural. Again, as I was saying, no animal in nature is confused about its diet except the human being, who has to now dig and educate himself or herself to figure out why is it that he or she is confused or doesn't know what's good for the body. So just to reiterate, few principles. Number one, being able to process the foods properly, educating ourselves on how to eat plants safely, and realize that yes, plants, when processed and prepared appropriately, can be very beneficial. They can be medicinal and provide some nutrition, but they cannot be the bulk of our nutrition. This is the mistake that many people make, because again, our human body can only make use of two things, two nutrients: protein and fat. Carbohydrates are not required for life, and vegetables are optional. So it's very simple. we have the bulk of your nutrition come from animals, and eat plants wisely, prepare them properly, and educate yourself on a combination, because that's also important. So, for example, I didn't know that white rice, when not eaten with its ancestral context, meaning with ham or seafood, will lead to B1 deficiency. It will block the body to absorb vitamin B1. So again, it's not only what we eat, it's what we're able to absorb, and that has a lot to do with combinations, what we eat with what, and how we prepare. So I want to mention here that please do not take this as nutritional advice. This is just basic information to really help. If only one person listening to this realizes what they're doing, or picks up one of the books that I mentioned on veganism or vegetarianism, and really informs, has the humility to say, I'm curious, let me look deeper into this, and does their due diligence to educate themselves, and not trust, not buy anything that is being promoted these days. And please ask yourself also, who is benefiting from your unhappiness or your misery? Because nothing is random. All systems that are not wholesome, as there are many of them in the world today, they do not like to have free thinkers, people who have clear, brilliant, strong, calm, equanimous minds. And that's what's really at stake. This is not about living longer, having pleasure. This is about the basic condition of life, of health, which is our stepping stone, which is a necessity if we want to really cultivate our minds and attain the amazing, the unprecedented states of clarity and wisdom that the teachings of the Buddha direct us towards, guide us towards. And as I was saying earlier, Dhamma cannot grow on poor soil.